Cool. Okay, let's go ahead and let us begin. So tonight I have 4 things. They're not that big, but there are 4 things that we want to briefly review, and then we'll be done for this evening. So we might get done early, we might not. Let's see how it goes. So just briefly to review, we've already discussed this. Now, I haven't posted this yet, so maybe you didn't have a chance to look at this. What we're going to do now is I'll post this. Let's write down, we already have the example here. Let's just write down some ideas. So let's go ahead here. I'm going to do a new page. And what we're going to do here is exegetical outline and summary. So let's just write down very briefly some reminders and just some points for how we do an exegetical outline and summary. The purpose of an exegetical outline and summary is this. So our purpose is the foundation for our homiletical outline and proposition. So if you can imagine here, just big idea here. So just imagine here, we have the text here. And so from the text, we form a structural analysis. And then the structural analysis is the foundation. This is the foundation for our exegetical outline and summary. Now, and we're going to finish drawing this out so as we talk through here. Okay, so the purpose is we want to get to the homiletical outline and proposition. Okay, so then what we're going to do next is just thinking about, we're just going to briefly describe what this looks like. So this is just a brief description of how we're going to go about this. Okay, and so just several points here. Number 1, this follows the flow of thought of the biblical author. And so if it's following the flow of thought, necessarily this will not be symmetrical. That's the first thing I want to say. Number 2, this is written in your own words. In your own words. And number 3, this includes some commentary. So commentary does a lot more explanation. This is in between a paraphrase / commentary, because you are explaining some of those relationships that you studied. Okay, so it's not fully a commentary. It's really caught between the two here. Just restating the text is not enough. Just changing some words is not enough. It really has to be a paraphrase, and there has to be some explanation in it. Okay, there has to be some explanation. Another major point about this is this is time bound. So this includes original speaker / audience and context. Any questions or comments so far? This also should be written in full sentences. So even though you might be taking a portion of a sentence, whatever major point you're choosing, it should be in full sentences. And this is primarily for this is the description, and then let's just move this over here. We got summary here now. So then a summary is essentially what you're doing with the summary is you're taking all of this, you are going to condense down to one wordy sentence. Now, in fairness, this could also be 2 to 3 sentences. Okay, it has to be shorter than the exegetical. Okay, so it really should be ideally 1 sentence, 2 to 3 sentences can also work. Okay, this is also going to be wordy. This is also going to be time bound. And this is also going to include major components from your outline. This will be wordy and lengthy. If you can imagine here, now remember I drew that hermeneutical diagram back at the beginning of the class. Okay, so we're going to draw it again here. Okay, so if you can imagine, then this is then all exegesis in the original context. Okay, now we have a step for theology. We have a step. So then moving from here, this is outline description of an exegetical outline and summary. Now we're going to transition now to theological outline and summary. And essentially all this is now all you're going to do, all you're doing with this is you are taking this and now you're just going to insert it here. And so the only uniqueness that you're doing here is you're transforming your exegetical outline and summary into timeless truths. Okay, so if it doesn't make sense, that's the big idea. It's the exact same thing, only now it's timeless truths. Okay, so the big idea here is that when you convert this to a timeless truth, so this is timeless truths, and these should be more eternal. Okay. So if you are and maybe with Paul's letters it's 1-to-1 because it's we're in the church, fair enough. But in other contextual issues with Paul or in the Old Testament, if you can't if you when you convert your outline to eternal truths and you're like, man, I don't think that's true, there's a problem. Okay, so you should rewrite the outline in such a way that that the truths are timeless. Okay, does that make sense? Ask a question if you have a question. Is everyone tracking there with what we're doing?
Yes.
Okay, good. Now, to be honest with you and to be transparent, when I'm preparing a sermon, I don't have the time to just make a theological outline and summary and then go on to homiletic. I would go exegetical right to homiletics. And sometimes I just go straight from structural to homiletics. With that being said, that's dangerous. And I won't do it in the Old Testament or poetic, prophetic. In some places, I'm very careful. Okay, meaning to say that until you get good at this, I'd really recommend you doing this, just because even though it's an extra step, it's safe. You will not preach or you won't mess up, or you won't struggle to understand those eternal truths, because sometimes it's hard. So in challenging passages, I would definitely not skip this step. Sometimes it's very easy. It's easy to skip just because it's what Paul is saying is a direct command for, whether it's in Ephesus or whether it's, husbands, love your wives. It's that's the eternal truth, right? So you don't have to, there's no need to change, right? So you can say from the pulpit, husbands, we must love our wives, right? It's just one to one. You don't have to worry about that. Other passages are much more challenging, especially in the prophets, where there's a prophecy for Israel. How does that work with us? All those different things. Okay. So that if you can imagine here, we're going from here to then theological truths and outline and summary. Now, within the Reformed context, and I'm sure someone's going to be making a comment that they watch it later on YouTube. What about Christ? How do we deal with Christ? 100% in one sense, we're already out of time for the class. So we're going to get to Christ, and we have a whole section after this. We're going to talk about Christ. But so, and each text is handled differently. And so we should be, when we move to the eternal, especially where Christ is explicit in the exegetical or typological, we should also be thinking about Christ and the gospel, okay? You're going to see when we work through Christ and the gospel, it's not always the same way. And so we have a separate step for that. And I just want to stress that we need to always be considering him just for sake of time. And we're really looking at a bird's eye view here. And that's why we just don't have the time to go into all of that. That would be another class for us to really focus on. We are gonna briefly just touch on how we include Christ, how we see Christ being fulfilled, and how we live in light of his truths and who he is, all that. Okay, but just from a very broad overview perspective, we're just moving from exegesis, exegetical outline and summary, to theological truths and outline and summary. And we're as we're doing that, we're also considering Christ, and we have a separate step for that. But in this process, we should be considering Christ. Okay, and then we're going to move from here then to our context. And so then this is where this is now contextual, and this is a homiletical outline and summary. All right, let's just take a pause here. Any questions or comments? Any questions or comments? So then just down here, we're going to then just move this down right into a homiletical outline, and we'll call it the big idea. So that's essentially moving us right into the last stage of hermeneutics, where we're actually preaching or teaching. Okay, what I want to do now is, before we get into the homiletical outline and the big idea, just because that's the last step really, before we move there, we have to, and we have a step in our method, we have to consider Christ and the gospel.